Psalm 30. Uh, I, I, I've spent 2 times just talking about the first verse. I will exalt you, Lord, for you rescued me. You refused to let my enemies triumph over me. And then verse 2. O Lord, my God, I cried to you for help, and you restored my health. You brought me up from the grave, O Lord. You kept me from falling into the pit of death. Uh, this is poetic, symbolic language. I don't think that God resurrected David from the dead. That's never in the record anywhere. But I do think there was a time, and maybe more than one, for David when he felt as hopeless as if he had been dead. When he talks about, when he writes, you brought me up from the grave, the actual word there is Sheol, which was the place of the dead. Was an undesirable place, but it wasn't hell. It was, and there's a whole bunch to that. I'm not going to even go into that. But what David is saying is, when it was bleakest, you brought me up out of that, O Lord. You kept me from falling into the pit of death. Well, maybe David was referring to a time when his God protected his life so that he didn't fall into physical death. Yet, I think more likely he's talking about times when his heart and mind were so clouded, and his life in that moment seemed so dark. Oh, kind of like in what he wrote in Psalm 23, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. That's what I think David's talking about. All of us have a valley of the shadow of death. All of us experience moments, some of us seasons, where it feels like if this continues, well, it'll be the pit of death. Now, if you're going through that time, from my own experience, one of the most difficult things is to somehow remind ourselves that this pit, this darkness, this valley of the shadow is not the entirety of my life. Yes, right now it feels like that's my whole life. But it wasn't really my whole life. It was, even if it was a fairly long season, it wasn't my whole life. That is so hard for me to keep in mind. Well, that's one of the things that is necessary if I'm going to survive and endure these seasons, these times. David says it was the Lord that brought him up out of that. It was the Lord that kept him from falling into the pit of death. This is a look back. Sometimes when you're in that stressful shadow land, okay, excuse me, it's worth looking back to times when God carried you through something maybe not even similar, except in the fact that it was a valley of the shadow of death, emotionally, maybe not physically. Okay. Why? Because if I remember what God has done, as David is doing here, it can set me up to be ready to give God the full access to my life for what he would do now in my life. Okay. Verse 4. Sing to the Lord, all you godly ones. Praise his holy name. Okay, David was a musician and a singer. Evidently good at both. And kind of stands to reason that a musician, a singer, would advocate for others to sing. But now I'm going to get on a little bit of a hobby horse here. Sing to the Lord, all you godly ones. I don't think I've ever been to a worship service. I mean, a structured church service where there wasn't some singing involved. And not always good singing. Sometimes it was just caterwaul. Well, okay. One of the things that I look back at my experience, church experience, and see is that we kind of boxed in worship to really just be the songs, the music. And this is my perception. You may not, the church you attend, it may not be the case, but it's like, okay, now we've done the worship, now we're going to move on to other things. And I think that's unfortunate, because those other things are equally worship when they're done from a sincere heart. But here's the key. They're done to God. Sing to the Lord. I have a lot of biases. I remember biases are, I mean, they're just peeves, right? I remember a long time ago taking J. Russell Morris to a minister's lunch, and the guy that was supposed to plan the program basically didn't. And so he said, well, let's just go around the room and share our pet peeves in the ministry, which basically all of us in the room kind of were thinking, well, turn me loose. And we went around and everybody, several guys shared, and it came to Brother Morris, and he stood up and he said, brothers, I have many peeves, but I've made it my practice never to pet them. Yeah. Well, I don't want to pet this peeve. But in reference to this idea of sing to the Lord, sometimes I'm in a church service when the music's going on, and it feels like these people are performing for the crowd. Everything from, and okay, you can disagree with me, but everything from the fog machine to the automated lights that flash in my eyes, kind of makes me think, I think they're playing to the audience in front of them instead of an audience of one. Well, nobody who's doing that has any interest in my opinion. So I'll talk about it here. Sing to the Lord. Whatever you do, in word or deed, Paul writes, do it heartily as unto the Lord. My whole life on that level can be an act of worship, doing it unto the Lord. Sing to the Lord. Ever church event you're going to that involves music, do your best to sing to the Lord. It's a struggle for a lot of us. Then he says, sing to the Lord, all you godly ones. How godly do I have to be in that group? There's a group of godly ones, because there are a lot of times I reflect on my own motives, my own heart, my mind, and I think, well, I don't fit. I kind of, What makes anybody godly? All right, a couple of things. The first thing is God's grace, not my effort. I can't ever make myself godly by my effort. It's only God's grace that makes me godly. And when I have submitted to and called out for, when I have embraced and accepted God's grace, He makes me godly. And out of gratitude for His grace, my behaviors reflect His nature. Nobody can do this perfectly. Only Jesus did that. But grace empowers us. Grace makes it possible for us to reflect the nature of God in our behaviors. And as a matter of fact, that's what godly means. God-like. I'm far from it. When I look at what I can of the total of my life and my thoughts and my attitudes and my feelings and the whole bucket, I'm thinking, I'm a long ways off. Don't want this to come across wrong, but I think that's okay. I think this whole thing of being a godly one is less a moment and more of a process. All right, the challenge. 2, first of all, can we today make it our goal and move with intention toward the idea that whatever I am doing, singing, David points to, with my life, I want that to be to the Lord. I want my life to be an act of worship. And secondly, to live as a godly one, not because we have gritted our teeth and grunted it out, but because God's grace is so, we have opened our hearts so well to God's grace that how could we not reflect His, as best we can, His nature? And here's where I would like to suggest you start. Who is closest to you? Maybe it's one person, or maybe it's several, but the closest to you. Sometimes they are the most difficult to reflect God's nature to. Some of it's familiarity, some of it is we tend to hold resentment toward them because we've got history with them. There's a whole bunch of other stuff, but here's the challenge. Make it your business today to reflect the nature and character of God to that one person. I'll see you next time on Soul Care with Stevie Boy.